A near-death camping experience by you/Renaissance scientist. I was never considered to be popular in high school. At best, I had 5 to 6 good close friends who I had hung out with most weekends. I normally wouldn't attend parties thrown by the cool kids, even if I was invited. I prefer to stick with my good friends, doing things like riding dirt bikes, shooting, and having bonfires. My best friend and I lived out in the rural parts of our region. This area had lots of wetlands, marsh, and canals which were part of the swampland surrounding the area. Luckily, there were no alligators, but the place was abundant with poisonous snakes and even black bears. Zach and I, along with our friend Ian, would often go camping in these areas. Truth is that seeing a black bear was pretty rare, and as long as you avoid the snakes, they'll leave you alone. There were quite a few campsites only accessible by boats. Zach's family owned a local campground where his grandfather had an old Boston whaler skiff, maybe 12 feet long. This was plenty enough to fit our camping equipment, which included the usual stuff like a tent, sleeping bags, lanterns, and a small propane grill. Of course, we also had a couple coolers of beer, water, and food. This particular camping trip, it was myself, Zach, Ian, and our other friend Austin, who went to another school but knew Zach from back in the day. The 4 of us had planned our trip for Labor Day weekend so we could have an extra day to spend camping. We had planned it for months, saving up enough money for beer and other supplies. A couple weeks before we left, there was an announcement that a hurricane was set to hit our area the same weekend. Due to the geography of our area, most hurricanes slow down and turn into a tropical storm or depression, so not nearly as much of a threat as an actual hurricane. We went ahead with our plans anyway since it was our senior year and we knew we'd all be in college the following year. Not knowing how many more trips we'd get, that Saturday we loaded the boat up with our supplies and launched off. The hurricane had since become a tropical depression and it looked like it would change trajectories anyway. It was about a 45-minute trip to the secluded campground we'd go to. The place basically never had anyone else there, so we were free to do what we normally did. Drink some beers, shoot our .22 rifles at the empty cans or water moccasins swimming across the canal, and sit around the fire telling stories. Looking back, I'm amazed Zach's dad let us go. Teenage boys carrying coolers full of beer with a few .22 rifles. I'm sure you're thinking we're all dumb for doing that, but we were actually responsible, looking out for one another and always made sure the guns went away once we started drinking. The worst part about it was that cell reception was spotty at best, so you'd be lucky to get a few text messages delivered. This was also before smartphones, so we had no way of checking the weather report unless we wanted to cost our parents a boatload of money. That was even if we could get any bars. Anyway, as the day progressed, dark storm clouds started to roll in. This wasn't unexpected because the storm wasn't too far off coast, so some rain was in the forecast. Zach's dad was an avid outdoorsman and had a tent that could survive winds higher than what was predicted. It was basically a mini house, sleeping 10 people comfortably with 4 separated sections. We anchored it down in the hardest dirt we could find and made sure the rain trap was secured tight. We finished our evening by making some burgers and polishing off a 24-pack of Bud Light until the rain came in. We quickly hustled off to the tent to play card games and drink more beer. I remember thinking, man, the rain is really coming down and it hasn't stopped, just before going to sleep. For those who haven't camped out in the rain, I highly recommend it. Sometime later that night, I was woken by Ian shaking me, sounding freaked out. "Look outside, look outside," he kept saying. I unzipped the tent and looked, only to see our boat floating closer to our tent, while the dock we tied it to was completely gone. Even the posts standing about 4 feet above the dock were completely submerged. The water had risen at least 5 feet and had crept within a few feet of our tent. The strip of land where we had set up camp was only about 50 to 60 feet wide, surrounded by water on 3 sides like a peninsula. It was then that we were faced with a decision. 1. We could try to wait out the storm, moving our tent back to higher ground, which was only maybe another 10 feet or so. Or 2. We could quickly pack, hopefully reaching the boat in time before it was surrounded by water, and drive 45 minutes in the dark with only a couple strong flashlights to guide us. Everyone besides Zach thought we should go, seeing that we didn't have service, and if the water kept rising, which it surely would, we'd be in serious danger. We eventually convinced Zach to agree to cut the trip short and sloppily packed our things. We ended up having to jump from the ground to the boat, cutting the rope tying it to the dock, which was 4 to 5 feet below the water at this point. I sat up front, shining the strongest flashlight about 20 feet in front of us. It was quite possibly the worst trip of my life. We had dumped our coolers in order to make the boat go faster, but couldn't go full speed due to the wake from the rising flood. Heavy, cold rain stung our faces and eyes, temporarily blinding us. Either side of the canal was completely submerged. The narrow channel had risen at least 10 feet. As we rounded a corner, I felt a scratch from underneath the boat to my right. The small skiff lurched, then suddenly tipped, throwing the 4 of us into the dark, murky water. It was then when my mind began thinking about my parents and siblings. How sad and angry they would be that I had died so young. I thought about how I'd never get to go to college and have a good job. I thought about my dreams of running off to the West Coast for grad school after I finished. I felt the weight of my steel-toed boots dragging me down into the muddy abyss. It was at that point when I saw the boat a few yards away flipped over, illuminated by the spotlight I had been using. I swam to it and found that my 3 companions had found a dry spot of the bank. They had been screaming for me, but due to the heavy wind and rain I couldn't hear them. We dragged the boat back to the bank, flipping it, and miraculously got the engine started. We must have drove 5 miles an hour the whole way home. I can tell you it was the longest boat ride of my life. We were cold, soaked to the bone, and making matters worse, still pretty impaired from all the beer we had consumed. When we saw the light of the boat ramp, we all thanked God. It was a short walk to Zach's house from there. Turns out his dad had been frantically trying to call us to tell us to come home. As it happens, the storm had hit a warm patch off the coast, strengthened and changed trajectories, hitting us directly. Winds that night were reported up to 80 miles per hour. A massive flooding in some low areas even caused people to evacuate. The worst part was telling Zach's dad about the damage his boat had taken and losing his tent and one of his 22 rifles. He was upset, but I think he felt responsible for letting us go in the first place. We finished the weekend by having a hurricane party at Zach's place, staying there Saturday and Sunday night playing video games and eating junk food. Unfortunately, it was our last camping trip, and sadly we don't see each other much anymore since I followed my dream to move to the West Coast. Zach stayed home and worked for his family, while Ian joined the Navy and started his own family. We still keep in touch and plan to have another camping trip in the future, this time making sure there's clear weather.